Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Whirlwinds of dust mimicked Jesse's journey as he topped the last rise overlooking Redemption. The town, a smattering of buildings bleached by the relentless sun, stood against the sprawling, uncaring landscape, its fate balanced on a knife's edge. The solitary church spire, a silent sentinel of faith, punctuated the horizon. The dry breeze carried a faint melody from the saloon. Sunlight glinting off its windows, a siren song of oblivion, or, perhaps, rebirth. Urging his mount onward, the cadence of hooves against the parched earth echoed the steady rhythm of his past. He guided his horse along Main Street, studying the faces of its inhabitants. Farmers etched with the land's demands, cowboys squinting with suspicion, women whose expressions mirrored the precarious balance of hope and apprehension. He was an outsider, regarded with the wariness reserved for strangers. A silent tip of his hat offered a glimpse into the haunted caverns of his eyes. He knew they saw the wear of weather and the etchings of a hard life, but he hoped they might also see a ember of longing for peace. The mingled scents of wood smoke and frying bacon, a domestic symphony, belied the knot of tension cinching his gut. He passed the general store, its laden shelves a monument to the town's tenacious spirit. Children's laughter, bright and clear, danced on the air, a painful reminder of the innocence he'd squandered. He halted before the saloon, its swinging doors a beckoning portal, yet resisted the allure, knowing that liquid solace offered only fleeting respite. He'd ridden into Redemption seeking something lasting, a chance to construct a future, not to drown in yesterday's regrets. Miles away, on the Whitaker spread, Mae surveyed her domain with a heart heavy as stone. The sun hammered down, scorching the already brittle earth. Her cattle were gaunt, the well dwindled to a trickle, and the bank breathed down her neck. The mantle of responsibility felt like a vise, thrust upon her too soon. Fever had claimed her parents, leaving her to raise Sarah and little Thomas. Barely a woman herself, she was now mother, father, and provider. She swiped at the perspiration beading on her brow. The dilapidated barn, the listing fences, the weed-choked fields, a slow surrender to decay. It was a losing proposition, yet she stubbornly refused to yield. This ranch was her family's heritage, their very essence infused in the soil. She would fight for it with savage tenacity, even if it meant forfeiting everything. Me? Sarah's voice, fragile as spun glass, interrupted her thoughts. Thomas is hungry. Mae turned, her face softening as she gazed at her younger sister. Sarah, though only 10, possessed a weary maturity, a reflection of shared hardship. Thomas, barely 5, clung to Sarah's hand, his eyes wide with an almost unbearable innocence. They were her wellspring of courage, her reason to persevere. "I'll make you something," Mae said, forcing a semblance of cheer. "Why don't you go cool off inside?" As the children retreated into the house, Mae pivoted back to face the ranch, her shoulders sagging beneath an invisible weight. She needed aid, desperately. She needed a miracle to rise from the dust. Jesse found the Whitaker ranch a few hours later, following a meandering track that snaked away from Redemption. The ranch house, a humble edifice of weathered planks, stood silhouetted against the fiery canvas of the setting sun. It exuded a lonely vulnerability, stark against the expansive landscape. He saw a woman tending the corral, her movements honed and purposeful. He remembered her from town, the woman with haunted depths in her eyes, and a jaw set with grim resolve. Mae Whitaker. Dismounting, the saddle leather complaining beneath him, he tethered his horse to a weathered post and walked toward the enclosure, his boots crunching across the arid ground. She paused, turning to face him with a guarded expression, a branding iron clutched in her hand, its tip glowing ember red in the twilight. "Can I help you?" she inquired, her voice coolly measured. Jesse removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked hair and the delicate map of lines around his eyes. "I'm looking for work," he stated, his tone level and unwavering. "I heard you might need a hand." Mae scrutinized him, her gaze unblinking, taking in the sinewy build, the calloused hands, the world-weariness etched around his eyes. But she also sensed something else, something lurking just beneath the surface, something that triggered a primal unease. "Who told you that?" she pressed. "News travels on the wind," Jesse parried, carefully avoiding her gaze. "I'm a capable worker. I know cattle, horses, everything needed on a ranch." "I can see you're no stranger to ranch life," Mae conceded, her voice retaining its cautious edge. "But I'm not sure I can afford to pay." "Wages." "I'm not asking for much," Jesse countered. "Just a place to sleep and enough to eat. I'm willing to earn my keep." Mae hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting needs and fears. She was desperate for help, yet couldn't risk endangering the siblings under her protection. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jesse paused, a flicker of shadow crossing his features. He had anticipated this question, knowing his past would always be a specter. "Kane," he said finally, the name feeling foreign on awe. His tongue. Jesse Kane. He'd left his true identity behind, buried alongside the man he no longer was. Mae repeated the name, as if testing its veracity, its weight. "I'll give you a chance," she conceded at last, "but don't for a moment. Imagine I trust you. I'll be watching you, Kane, every step of the way." Jesse nodded, his expression an unreadable mask. "Fair enough," he replied. "You won't regret it." As Mae resumed her task, Jesse observed her, a fragile spark of hope kindling within him. He had been granted a chance, however slender, to rebuild, to prove he could be more than the sum of his past transgressions. Yet he knew the spectres of his yesterday would forever be in waiting, poised to drag him back into the abyss. The branding iron hissed, searing its mark onto the hide of a calf. Redemption wouldn't come easy, but he was prepared to fight for it, for her. Hired hand, hidden scars the midday sun beat down on the porch as Mae studied the man before her. Jensen, he'd called himself. Tall, lean, with eyes the color of a storm brewing on the horizon. Eyes that didn't meet hers for long. He shifted his weight, the dust devils swirling around his worn boots mirroring the unease churning in Double-A. Her gut. "You say you've worked ranches before?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the creak of the porch swing. "Worked cattle, broke horses, fixed fences. Whatever needs doin'." She scanned his face, searching for any hint of dishonesty. There was a weariness etched in the lines around his mouth, a quiet strength in the set of his jaw. But beneath that, something flickered, something hidden. "References?" she pressed. He hesitated, just for a moment, before saying, "The places I worked are gone now. Folks moved on. Hard times, you know." She knew. Hard times were the air she breathed. Her parents gone, the ranch teetering on the brink of collapse, her siblings' futures resting squarely on her shoulders. She needed help, desperately. "But something about this Kane, Jensen. I can pay you." She named a pittance, lower than she wanted to, lower than any decent wage. He didn't flinch. "It'll do," he said, his gaze finally meeting hers, holding it for a fraction longer than before. She swallowed. "All right, Jensen. You're hired. But I expect a full day's work for that wage. And no trouble. Understand?" "Understood, ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt both respectful and strangely rehearsed. He started work immediately, saddling up a stubborn mare that had thrown 3 ranch hands in as many weeks. Mae watched from the porch, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Jensen moved with a quiet confidence, his touch gentle but firm. Spoke to the horse in low, soothing tones, and within minutes he had her saddled and ready to go. He rode her around the corral, his posture relaxed, his control absolute. The mare, usually a whirlwind of temper, responded with surprising docility. That afternoon, he tackled the broken fence line along the south pasture. Mae joined him, handing him tools, watching him work. He was efficient, methodical, his movements precise. He drove posts deep into the hard earth, mended the wire with practiced ease. He didn't speak much, answering her questions with short-clipped responses. "Where'd you learn to work with horses like that?" she asked, trying to break through his reserve. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Learned from my father," he said, his voice flat. "He was a horseman." "And your mother?" His jaw tightened. "She's gone." The finality in his voice silenced her. She sensed a pain there, a wound he didn't want to expose. She changed the subject, pointing to a section of the fence that needed extra bracing. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, they returned to the ranch house. Her younger siblings, 8-year-old Billy and 10-year-old Sarah, were waiting on the porch, their faces alight with curiosity. "Who's that? Me?" Billy asked, pointing at Jensen. "This is Kane Jensen," she said. "He's going to be helping us around the ranch." Sarah, ever the bolder of the two, stepped forward. "Can you ride a horse?" she asked him. Jensen smiled, a fleeting, almost hesitant expression that transformed his face. "I can," he said. "Maybe I'll take you two for a ride sometime." Billy and Sarah exchanged excited glances. Mae watched them interact, a flicker of warmth spreading through her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this Kane Jensen wouldn't be so bad after all. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Mae sat on the porch, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. Jensen emerged from the bunkhouse, his silhouette framed by the dim light. He walked towards the corral, leaning against the fence, his gaze fixed on the horses grazing in the moonlight. Mae watched him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She needed him. The ranch needed him. Her siblings seemed to like him. But the unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. She rose and walked towards him. "Jensen," she said. He turned, his eyes unreadable in the darkness. "Ma'am? You said you've worked ranches before, but you haven't said much about yourself, about where you come from." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets in the fields. Finally he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Some things are best left buried, ma'am. And you think you can bury your past here, in redemption?" she challenged, using the town's name as a loaded accusation. He looked away, his gaze drifting across the vast expanse of the land. "I'm just looking for a place to start over," he said. "Everyone has a past, Jensen, she countered. It's what we do with it that matters. He turned back to her, his eyes finally meeting hers, holding them with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Some pasts can't be outrun, ma'am, he said. They just keep catching up. He pushed himself away from the fence and walked back towards the bunkhouse, leaving Mae standing alone in the darkness, the weight of his words heavy on her heart. She knew he was hiding something big, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was going to bring trouble to her doorstep. Trouble she couldn't afford. But she was desperate, and he was strong. And maybe, just maybe, she could keep his secrets buried long enough to save her ranch and her family, even if it meant risking her own heart in the process. The bargain felt dangerous, like a deal with the devil, but Mae was starting to think the devil was the only one willing to make deals in redemption these days. Echoes of yesterday, the bitter reek of spent gunpowder clung to Jesse, an invisible shackle forged in a life he'd vowed to abandon. He attacked his hands with harsh soap at the wash basin, yet the coppery taste of bloodshed, both inflicted and suffered, lingered. The First National Bank of Redemption Gulch swam before his eyes every time he blinked. A place far from its namesake. The bank's air had been thick, heavy with the sugary sour stench of dread and aged currency. 3 of them. Jesse leading the way, Silas, a brother in blood and depravity, and a callow youth named Billy, barely past boyhood. Already Silas, ever avaricious, barked orders at the teller, a fragile man whose spectacles seemed perpetually about to tumble from his nose. "Fill the satchels!" "Chop chop, old-timer!" Silas's voice reverberated, amplified by the marble surfaces. Jesse covered the patrons, Colt Peacemaker a steady extension of his arm, his gaze a glacial sweep, a skill he possessed, not relished. The ability to command, a chilling stillness amidst frenzy. Billy, green around the gills, stumbled over a rug, his rifle clattered onto the polished floor. The sound ripped through the suffocating quiet. A woman shrieked. "Billy, you clumsy idiot!" Silas spat, his attention fractured. It was then the sheriff, a stout man crowned with a bushy walrus mustache, charged through the entrance, shotgun leveled. "Drop your weapons," he bellowed. The following clash erupted in a cacophony of sound and motion. Jesse recalled the Colt's thunderous report, glass shattering like brittle bones, the screams weaving through the sharp retort of gunfire. He witnessed Silas fell the sheriff in a brutal spray. He remembered the lawman's eyes, alight with fading life as he crashed to the ground. Then, complete pandemonium. Billy, consumed by panic, fired a wild shot that struck a young girl huddled behind her mother. Her cry, piercing as a shard of ice, sunk straight into Jesse. Time stopped. Seeing Jesse's hesitation, Silas roared, "Jesse, get your ass in gear!" He reacted, but not as Silas intended. He seized Billy by his collar, shoving him toward the rear exit. "Get out! Run!" Silas snarled. "You've gone soft, Jesse? We finished the job." Jesse ignored him, firing a salvo to cover their flight. Turning to flee, he glimpsed Silas snatch an additional sack of cash, eyes glittering with greed. They escaped, yet the girl's image, the sheriff's fading sight, and Silas's rapacity had branded themselves in Jesse's mind. That evening, they divided the spoils. Silas claimed the bulk, crowing about his kill. Jesse merely stared at the fire, the girl's scream echoing in the silence. He knew, with an icy certainty, he was finished. The following dawn, he rose before the sun, leaving Silas and Billy asleep beside the dying embers. Taking only his horse and a few greenbacks, he vanished. Jesse splashed his face, attempting to obliterate the past. But the memories were tenacious, adhering like a malignant odor. He was outrunning more than just the law, he was fleeing himself. He examined his reflection. The face staring back was scored with regret and exhaustion. Could he ever truly break free from the shadow of his past? He considered Mae, her unblinking conviction, her unwavering strength, her siblings, their artless laughter, their implicit trust. A wave of guilt washed over him. He was deceiving them, living a fallacy. How long before his previous existence swallowed him whole, demolishing the tentative peace he'd discovered? Silas's accusation resonated. "You've gone soft, Jesse?" Was he, or was he at last evolving into the man he should have been all along? He dried his face and stepped out into the waning daylight. The ranch lay still, the animals settling in for the night. He found Mia on the porch repairing a saddle. Approaching her, his heart felt like lead. "Everything all right, Jesse?" she asked, her voice a balm. He stalled, the truth a bitter pill on his tongue. "Just thinking," he said, skirting her gaze. She nodded, her eyes searching. Sometimes thinking can weigh a man down. He sat, the silence deepening between them. He longed to release it all, to confess, to beg forgiveness. But he was paralyzed by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing his hope. "Did you know my ka?" Mae asked suddenly, piercing the quiet. Before he died?" Jesse stiffened. "No, ma'am, I didn't." A lie, or a half-truth. He'd seen him around town before taking the job. He knew he was a decent man, highly regarded. Mae sighed. "He always said a man isn't defined by his past. It's what he does with his future that matters." Her words struck like a physical blow. Was she granting absolution without knowledge of his transgressions? He looked at her, her face bathed in the mellow light of twilight. He saw not judgment, but understanding. He was a wise man, Jesse said, his voice rough. He wanted to embrace her father's sentiment, to trust that he could outrun his past and forge a new destiny. But he understood, in his bones, that the ghosts of yesterday would eternally linger, waiting for him to falter, and he dreaded the inevitable day they caught up. He rose abruptly. "I'll check on the horses." He needed isolation to wrestle with his demons. He headed toward the stables, the weight of his history crushing him. Nearing the barn, he caught the distant sound of a horse nearing, the cadence of hooves on packed dirt. It was closing fast, too fast. He froze, his hand instinctively seeking the colt on his thigh. A wave of dread crested over him. Had it finally arrived? Was this the reckoning he had always been dreading? He strained his ears, listening intently. Without a doubt, a single rider, traveling hell-bent for leather. He retreated into the shadows, every sense on high alert. This time, there would be no running. He would confront his past, no matter the price. Whispers of trust, the embers of the campfire pulsed orange against the encroaching darkness. Lily, perched on a fallen log almost as big as herself, swung her legs, her gaze fixed on Jesse. Billy, never one for stillness, circled him like a curious pup, kicking at loose stones. "Did you ever fight a bear, Mr. Jesse?" Billy's voice, high and reedy, broke the quiet. Jesse, whittling a piece of wood into a crude bird, paused, his brow furrowed in thought. "A bear? No, Billy, I can't say that I have. though I did once see a mountain lion bigger than your pony," Lily gasped, her eyes wide. "Really? What happened?" He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "It saw me, and I saw it. We both decided the other wasn't worth the trouble." He resumed whittling, the knife flashing in the firelight. Billy wasn't satisfied. "But what if it had attacked? Would you have shot it?" Jesse sighed, his gaze drifting towards the star-dusted sky. "Shooting something should always be the last resort, Billy. There's always another way, if you look hard enough." Mae watched from the porch, leaning against a weathered post. The scene tugged at something deep within her. Jesse, the quiet, brooding stranger, was transforming before her eyes. The children, usually wary of outsiders, were drawn to him like moths to a flame. "Tell us a story, Mr. Jesse," Lily pleaded, her voice laced with anticipation. Jesse looked up, meeting Mae's gaze across the yard. He offered a small, hesitant smile. "All right. How about the tale of Coyote and the stars?" And so he began, his voice low and melodic, weaving a tale of mischief and wonder. He spoke of a time when the stars were trapped in a box, and a clever coyote, driven by curiosity, set them free, scattering them across the night sky. He imbued Coyote with a playful cunning, his voice rising and falling with the character's antics. Lily and Billy were captivated, their eyes glued to his face, their imaginations soaring. Mae found herself drawn in as well, the familiar story taking on a new resonance in Jesse's telling. As the story ended, Lily snuggled closer to Jesse, resting her head against his arm. Billy, ever restless, continued to circle, mimicking Coyote's mischievous grin. "That was a good one, Mr. Jesse," Billy said, finally settling down beside his sister. "Thank you, Billy," Jesse replied, his voice soft. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only with the crackling of the fire and the chirping of crickets. Mae pushed herself off the porch post and walked towards the campfire. "Bedtime, you two," she said gently, clapping her hands. "Mr. Jesse needs his rest too." Lily groaned, but didn't protest, allowing Mia to pull her up. Billy, however, lingered, his gaze fixed on Jesse. "Will you tell us another story tomorrow night, Mr. Jesse?" Jesse smiled. "If you're good and help your sister with her chores, I just might." Billy grinned, his face lighting up. "I will. I promise." Mae led the children back towards the house, casting a grateful glance at Jesse over her shoulder. He nodded in response, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. As Maya tucked the children into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter, the future a little less bleak. Jesse's presence, once a source of anxiety, was becoming a source of hope. The thought startled her. Hope was a dangerous thing to harbor, especially when it was tied to a man she barely knew. She returned to the campfire, finding Jesse staring into the flames. He looked up as she approached. "They like you," she said simply, breaking the silence. "They're good kids," he replied, his voice low. "Thank you," Mae said, her voice thick with emotion. "For telling them the story." He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. It was nothing. The sound of approaching hooves shattered the quiet. Mae stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle leaning against a nearby tree. A lone rider emerged from the darkness, silhouetted against the moonlit horizon. He rode a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming even in the dim light. As he drew closer, Mae recognized him. Jedediah Stone. He dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on Mae. "Evening, Miss Whitaker," he drawled, his voice smooth as silk. "Lovely night for a visit." Maya crossed her arms, her body tense. "What do you want, Stone?" He chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Just came to see how you were faring. Heard you were having a bit of trouble keeping things afloat. That's none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," he said, taking a step closer. "I have a proposition for you, a way to ease your burdens." He gestured towards the sprawling reg with a sweep of his hand. "This land is worth a fortune, Miss Whitaker. I'm willing to offer you a fair price for it." Mae's jaw tightened. "This land isn't for sale, Stone. You know that." He sighed, his expression hardening. "Don't be stubborn, Mae. You can't handle this place on your own. You have those children to think about. A tidy sum from me would set them up for life." "We're doing just fine," she snapped. Stone's eyes narrowed. "Are you now? Or are you just too proud to admit you need help? I'm a patient man, Mae. But patience has its limits. Think about it. A few signatures and all your troubles disappear." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Or you can continue to struggle, watching this place crumble around you. The choice is yours." He turned to remount his horse. "I'll be back in a week. I expect you'll have come to your senses by then." He swung onto his stallion and spurred it into a gallop, disappearing back into the darkness, leaving Mae standing in the dust, her heart pounding in her chest. Jessie watched him go, his face a mask of cold fury. He turned to Maya, his eyes filled with concern. "What did he want?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Mae looked at Jessie, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "He wants my land," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And he's not going to stop until he gets it." Stone's smile was a mere grimace, failing to warm his cold, predatory eyes that scrutinized Mia like a hawk eyeing a field mouse. He invaded her space, his imported cologne a jarring note amidst the earthy, honest scent of the ranch. "Consider it, Miss Whitaker, truly. This constant struggle, it's a heavy burden for a woman like you. Comfort, security, they're within reach." His voice trailed, leaving his proposition suspended. Mae stood firm, though Jessie noticed the fine tremor in her clenched fists. "This land belongs to my family, Mr. Stone. I won't be intimidated into surrendering it." Her voice, though resolute, betrayed an underlying fatigue. A low chuckle rumbled from Stone's chest, a sound that prickled Lily's skin. Jessie watched her squeeze Billy's hand tighter. "Intimidation? My dear, I'm offering an escape, a graceful retreat before matters become unmanageable." The word hung, a veiled threat permeating the air. Jessie felt the tension thicken, the unspoken menace pressing down like a gathering storm. He'd witnessed this brand of coercion before, its insidious power to break even the most stubborn spirit. He'd even used it, in a past life. "Unmanageable how, Mr. Stone?" Mae's chin lifted defiantly. Stone's gaze flicked over Lily and Billy before settling back on Mae. "Well, ranching is a costly endeavor, isn't it? Fences demand repair, livestock requires care, accidents are prone to occur, and without the means to mitigate them." He spread his hands, feigning innocence. Something sparked within Jessie. He'd observed Mae's trials, admired her spirit, but this blatant threat against her kin was an inviolable boundary. A surge of protectiveness, visceral and potent, flooded him. He moved instinctively, placing himself between Maya and Stone. The very air vibrated with a shift in dominance. Stone, accustomed to commanding every room he entered, now faced Jesse's unwavering gaze. "Mr. Stone," Jesse's voice, a low rumble, contrasted sharply with his typical drawl. "I believe it's time for you to leave." Stone's eyes narrowed, gauging the challenge. He registered the coiled strength in Jesse's frame, the steely glint in his eyes hinting at a history he couldn't fathom. "And who are you to dictate my actions, hired hand?" Jesse didn't falter. "Someone who takes exception to you menacing a woman and her family." Mae gasped softly behind him, unfamiliar with this side of Jesse. Stone's false smile evaporated. "You're making a grave error, son. You have no concept of who you're dealing with." "Perhaps not," Jesse conceded, his voice a low growl. "But I recognize a bully when I see one, and I know how to handle them." He closed the distance, invading Stone's comfort zone. "Now, will you depart peacefully, or must I expedite your exit?" Stone's face reddened. He clearly wasn't used to being defied, especially not by someone he considered insignificant. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words died in his throat beneath the force of Jesse's stare. He retreated a step, his gaze darting from Jesse to Mae, a flicker of something close to fear surfacing in his eyes. "This is far from over, Miss Whitaker," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You will live to regret this." He spun on his heel and strode towards his waiting buggy, his shoulders tight with simmering rage. The driver, a nervous man in a threadbare suit, jumped to attention, and the buggy lurched away, leaving a swirling cloud of dust. A heavy silence descended. Lily and Billy stared at Jesse, their eyes wide with awe. Mae remained frozen, her breath shallow. Jesse turned to her, his expression softening. The dangerous edge vanished, replaced by quiet concern. "Are you all right, Mae?" She blinked, as if jolted awake. I don't know what to say, Jesse. Thank you." Her voice was a mere breath. He shrugged, uneasy with her gratitude. "He had no right to speak to you that way." "No," she agreed, a spark of renewed anger in her eyes. "He didn't." She regarded him then, truly saw him, perhaps for the first time. She perceived the deep lines bracketing his mouth, the determined set of his jaw, the unwavering conviction in his eyes. She saw a man who transcended the label of ranch hand. A man capable of what? She couldn't articulate it. But she knew, with sudden clarity, that Jesse Kane was a force to be reckoned with. The realization sent a shiver through her, a blend of trepidation and something else. Something elusive. "Jesse," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the crickets' chorus. "Why did you do that?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Someone had to. But why you?" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. And in that instant, Mae perceived something new in his gaze. A vulnerability, a profound ache, interwoven with a fierce protectiveness that was both unsettling and captivating. "Because," he said, his voice roughened with emotion, "I couldn't stand by and watch him hurt you." The words hung between them, laden with unacknowledged meaning. Mae's heart hammered against her ribs. She was at a loss for words, for actions. She only knew that a shift had occurred between them, a line crossed. Lily tugged on Mae's skirt. "Jesse was so brave, Mae. He scared Mr. Stone away." Billy nodded eagerly. "Yeah, like a real gunslinger." Mae forced a smile, struggling to regain her composure. "Yes, he was indeed very brave." She glanced back at Jesse, her eyes searching. "Thank you, Jesse. Truly." He simply nodded, his gaze still locked on hers. The air thrummed with unspoken tension. Mae knew that their dynamic was irrevocably altered. He had revealed a facet of himself she hadn't suspected, one that both alarmed and intrigued her. She shivered, despite the warm evening air. The confrontation with Stone had left her shaken, but Jesse's intervention had affected her even more deeply. She felt exposed, vulnerable, not only to Stone's threats, but to a far more insidious danger than nascent stirrings of feelings she couldn't afford to entertain. She averted her gaze, turning toward the house. "Come along, children. Let's get you to bed." She guided them inside, leaving Jesse standing alone in the fading light. He watched her retreat, his expression inscrutable. He'd overstepped a boundary, undeniably. But whether he had protected her or irrevocably complicated matters remained to be seen. He only knew that he couldn't idly witness harm befall another soul he cared for. The ranch had evolved into more than a refuge, it was blossoming into a haven. And Mae was transforming into something more profound than merely an employer. Campfire confessions, the campfire's dying light painted the twilight with strokes of amber and umber, long shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the land. A cool breath of air, scented with pine needles and the ghost of charred wood, enveloped Mae, a familiar solace against the encroaching dark. She perched on a fallen log, her attention absorbed by the dwindling flames, their crackling symphony underscored by the lone, mournful call of a distant owl. A few feet away, Jesse carved at a piece of wood, his movements economical, his expression obscured by the gloom. "Thank you," Mae murmured, the sound breaking the stillness. "For standing up to Stone today." Jesse's gaze flickered to hers, a brief connection before returning to his carving. "He had no business speaking to you that way." His words, unadorned and devoid of bravado, possessed a quiet conviction that resonated deep within Mae. "He's desperate," she sighed, drawing her shawl tighter. "Aren't we all? This ranch. It's been in my family for generations. It's the last vestige of them." Jesse paused, turning the wood in his hands. "It's a fine place, worth defending, easier imagined than achieved," Mae retorted, a trace of acrimony lacing her voice. "This drought has been relentless. Cattle prices have plummeted. The bank is a constant shadow. Sometimes it feels like I'm barely treading water." She raked a hand through her hair, her weariness palpable. "My siblings, they don't grasp the weight of it all. They are young." "They will," Jesse countered softly. "And they're fortunate to have you." Mae regarded him, surprised by the genuine sentiment in his tone. "I don't always feel very fortunate," she admitted, a wry, vulnerable smile gracing her lips. "But I wouldn't relinquish them for anything." The fire spat, a brief eruption of sparks against the night. Jesse tossed his carving into the blaze. "Running a ranch is a brutal endeavor," he remarked, his eyes fixed on the leaping flames. "It demands fortitude. It demands a healthy dose of stubbornness." Mae chuckled softly. "I'm not lacking in that department." "I can attest to that," Jesse replied, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. He hesitated. "What are your hopes, Mae?" "For this land? For your kin?" The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken potential. Mae inhaled deeply, carefully considering her response. "I yearn to see my siblings thrive here, safe and content. I want to honor my family's history. I need to prove to myself, and to everyone else, that I'm capable of this." She paused, then confided in a near whisper. "I long to know what it feels like to lay down this burden, just for a moment." Jesse nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's a worthy aspiration," he affirmed quietly. "Worth fighting for as well." He averted his gaze, peering into the impenetrable blackness beyond the firelight. The ensuing quiet hummed with a charged intimacy, both alluring and unsettling. "What about you, Jessie?" she ventured, her voice barely audible. "What do you desire?" He tensed imperceptibly, a fleeting darkness shadowing his features. "A clean slate," he answered, his voice deep and rough. "A place to belong." "Everyone warrants that," Mae responded, her heart aching for the unspoken pain she sensed beneath his stoic facade. "What life did you lead before you came here? Before you became Jesse Kane, ranch hand?" He hesitated, his jaw clenched. "A different man," he stated finally, his voice clipped and curt. "A man I'm not proud of." He rose abruptly, moving to the periphery of the fire's reach. "I committed acts I deeply regret." Mae watched him, her pulse quickening. She knew, intuitively, that he was withholding, that a dark secret lurked in his past, a secret he guarded fiercely. But she also discerned genuine contrition in his eyes, a yearning for absolution that mirrored her own internal struggle. "Everyone carries regrets, Jessie," she declared softly. "It's what you do with them that truly matters." He turned back to face her, his eyes searching hers intently. "You don't know the extent of my actions," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Perhaps not," Mae countered, meeting his gaze head-on. "But I know what I see now. I see a man who toils tirelessly, who exhibits kindness and loyalty, who displays a willingness to defend what he believes in." She paused, then added, "I see a man striving to improve himself." The silence stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken emotions. Jesse advanced a step closer, his eyes locked on hers, his expression inscrutable. The fire crackled and danced, flitting shadows across his face, accentuating the etched lines and the profound depth of eyes that bore witness to a lifetime of concealed stories. "Why are you so inclined to see the best in me, Mae?" he questioned, his voice laced with raw emotion. "You hardly know me." Mae stood, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. She took a hesitant step towards him, drawn by an unseen force, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Perhaps," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But at times, a lifetime isn't required to perceive someone's true nature." Their gazes melded, and for an extended moment, time seemed suspended. The air thrummed with an electric current, a palpable tension vibrating between them. Mae could feel the fire's heat caressing her face, the warmth of his intense stare searing into her very core. She yearned to reach out, to touch him, to close the distance that separated them. Yet she hesitated, fearing the shattering of their delicate connection. Jesse reached out, his fingertips grazing her cheek, his touch sending a cascade of shivers down her spine. "Me," he breathed, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the spell, jarring them back to harsh reality. Both of them pivoted, their eyes widening as they observed two figures emerge from the encompassing darkness. It was Caleb and Lily, Mae's younger siblings, their faces alight with youthful exuberance. "Me! Jesse! Look what we found!" Caleb called out, brandishing something aloft. The magic evaporated. Jesse withdrew his hand, retreating back into the shadows. Mae inhaled deeply, struggling to regain her composure, the ghost of his touch still lingering on her skin. The world had subtly shifted. The shared intimacies and surreptitious glances, the fervor of the instant now cooled, yet not entirely extinguished. And Mae knew, with a certainty that both enthralled and terrified her, that things would never be quite the same. The price of secrets the mercantile throbbed with its usual midday energy, a blend of tanned leather and roasted coffee swirling in the sasha. Air. Yet, a different fragrance permeated the space, the cloying sweetness of rumor, as potent as fermenting fruit. Martha Jenkins, perched on a barrel top beside the cracker display, served as its eager herald. Her voice, normally a soft murmur, now possessed a cutting, urgent quality. "Side, Earl? Right there at the sheriff's office?" Plastered on the wall, plain as day. Earl, a weathered prospector whose face bore a roadmap of grime, grumbled. "Saw what, Martha?" "Don't have time for games. Got a mule waiting on new shoes." Martha edged closer, eyes alight with mischievous glee. "A wanted notice, Earl. A real deal one. Reward money and all." Earl remained unmoved. "Not exactly a novelty around here, Martha, those things. But this one's different. It's—" Martha tapped a polished nail against her chin, savoring the anticipation. "Who?" Earl finally asked, patience dwindling. "Jesse. Jesse Kane. Or, that's what he goes by. According to that paper, his true moniker is darker. Something to chill your bones." A rustle of whispers rippled through the store. Patrons paused mid-transaction, straining to catch Martha's every word. The name, Jesse, hung suspended, pregnant with unasked questions and burgeoning suspicion. Sheriff Brody sat rigid at his desk, the unfolded poster dominating his view. Harsh light splintered across the aged paper, illuminating the roughly-sketched face he knew too well. Jesse Kane, or rather, the specter of who he once was. The designation beneath Caleb Stone sent an icy tendril snaking down his spine. Caleb Stone, sought for robbery, assault, and murder. The accusations danced before Brody's vision, a chronicle of brutality that defied the image of the quiet, industrious man he'd observed at the Whitaker spread. He'd shaken Jesse's strong, weathered hand and seen firsthand his quiet competence, his steadfast devotion to Mae and her kin. Could a man truly remake himself to such a degree? Could the darkness of Caleb Stone be so deeply interred? Brody exhaled heavily, rubbing his weary eyes. He knew the dictates of the law. He understood his obligations. But he also acknowledged the vagaries of human nature, the prospect of contrition, the seduction of a clean slate. He couldn't convict a man based on yellowed paper and small-town gossip. He needed verification. He needed to search Jesse's eyes and discern whether the Caleb Stone of old still lurked within. He shoved back from his workstation, the chair screeching in protest. A visit to the ranch was in order, along with some brutally honest inquiries. Out on the far pasture, Jesse was repairing a collapsed section of fence, the steady thud of his hammer competing with the drone of cicadas. Sunlight blazed on his back, soaking his shirt with perspiration. He welcomed the exertion, the simple satisfaction of restoring something broken. It mirrored the life he was striving to forge, a life purged of the specters of his past. He straightened, swiping his brow with a grimy hand. Unnoticed Sheriff Brody approaching on horseback. A cold dread constricted his stomach. Brody rarely visited the ranch. Dismounting, Brody's expression conveyed nothing. "Kane," he said, his tone even. "Got a moment?" Jesse nodded, setting down his tool. "Something amiss, Sheriff?" "Could be," Brody replied, his gaze unwavering. He retrieved a folded paper from his saddlebag and extended it. Jesse hesitated, then accepted it. He unfolded it slowly, his pulse drumming in his ears. The crude likeness leered back at him, a twisted echo of a life he desperately tried to bury. The name, Caleb Stone, burned itself into his awareness like a brand. The list of transgressions unfurled, a stark inventory of the darkness he carried within. He met Brody's gaze, his face drained of color. He offered no denial. He couldn't. "That is me," he admitted, his voice almost inaudible. Brody's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Figured as much." A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm Jesse. His past had finally cornered him. The life he'd constructed, the tranquility he'd discovered, the stirrings of affection he felt for Mia, all threatened to shatter like glass. "What are you going to do, Sheriff?" he managed, his voice tight with apprehension. Brody paused, his gaze drifting toward the distant rooftops of the ranch. "That hinges on you, Kane," he said, his voice hushed. "It hinges on what you've done since this." He indicated the poster. "And what your intentions are now." Jesse surveyed the fields, the distant barn, where he knew Mia and her siblings were. A fierce surge of protectiveness filled him. "I am not that man anymore, Sheriff," he asserted, his voice gaining strength. "I swear it. I've changed. I only want an honest life now." Brody studied him intently, his eyes piercing, analytical. "Honest, huh? Concealing your history isn't exactly honest, Kane." "No," Jesse conceded, weighed down by his secret. "But it was vital. I was living in fear." Brody gave a slow nod. "Fear can drive a man to desperation. But it can also be a cage. Now, this notices it's out there. The talk has begun. You realize what that entails?" Jesse nodded, his stomach a knot of anxiety. "They'll be afraid. They'll want me gone." "Some will," Brody confirmed. "Some will desire more than that. There are scavengers who hunt men like Caleb Stone." Jesse's expression hardened. "Then I'll confront them." "What about Mae and her family?" Brody probed, his tone gentle yet firm. "Are you going to invite that kind of storm down on them?" Jesse closed his eyes, a tide of despair washing over him. He'd fought so hard to outrun his origins, yet it had pursued him relentlessly, threatening to obliterate everything he cherished. He looked back at Brody, resolve hardening his features. "I won't allow that," he stated, his voice unwavering. "I will do whatever it takes to safeguard them, even if that means facing my own demons." As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long, deepening shadows, the air cooled and the cricket's song intensified. The fate of Jesse Kane and the Whitaker Ranch hung precariously in the balance. The reckoning for buried truths was at hand. Riding lessons and hidden truths, a cool breath of morning, infused with the earthy tang of sage, swept across the ranch. Beside Buttercup, the chestnut mare, Lily's face shone with eager anticipation. Jesse, down on one knee, tweaked the stirrup. "Remember, Lilybug," he murmured, his voice a deep resonance. "Kindness. Speak to her like she's a friend, not a subject." A quick nod was her reply, her gaze earnest. "Exactly," Jesse affirmed, a rare, unguarded smile softening his rugged features. With a gentle lift, he placed her astride Buttercup. "Easy on the reins. Now, a light touch, avoid spooking her." Mae leaned against the weathered porch railing, a lukewarm mug cradled in her hands, watching Jesse and Lily. A complex swirl of emotions churned within her. He showed such tenderness, a patience unexpected in a man with his background. He addressed Lily with quiet respect, acknowledging her nascent abilities rather than treating her as fragile. A sharp pang of longing struck her. It had been an age since anyone had regarded her with such gentle consideration. From her vantage, Mae could discern the pale scar bisecting Jessie's brow, a silent chronicle of a life lived on the edge. What tales did it conceal? What darkness did he desperately seek to escape? Sheriff Brody's warnings resurfaced in her thoughts, painting the portrait of Caleb Stone, a man known for violence. Yet, the man guiding Lily seemed a world apart from that chilling image. "He's good with her," Thomas observed, startling her with his sudden presence. He meticulously whittled at a piece of wood, his brow furrowed. "Lily hasn't been this happy since Pa passed." Mae sighed, her gaze softening as she watched Lily giggle, her cheeks flushed with delight as Buttercup took a tentative step. "I know. He is." Jessie kept pace with Buttercup, his hand a light reassurance on Lily's leg. "Easy does it," he advised, his voice a near whisper. "Feel her gait. Let her lead you." Emboldened by his nearness, Lily straightened, her grip on the reins firming. Sensing her rider's newfound confidence, Buttercup transitioned to a slow, ambling walk. "I'm doing it, Jessie," Lily exclaimed, her voice bubbling with pure joy. "I'm really doing it," Jessie grinned, lines radiating from the corners of his eyes. "You sure are, Lilybug. A natural." Mae pushed off the railing, moving toward them. As she drew closer, a flash of sunlight snagged her attention, glinting off something by the watering trough. "Jessie," she called, her tone edged with concern. "Something's amiss with the water." Jessie halted Buttercup and helped Lily down, his easy amusement giving way to focused alertness. He handed the reins to Lily. "Stay put, Lily, with Thomas." He approached the trough, his senses heightened. Mae followed, her heart hammering. The air thrummed with unspoken tension. The trough, normally brimming with cool crystalline water, was almost dry. A sharp, metallic scent hung in the air. Jessie knelt, his fingers tracing the wooden planks, his expression darkening. "Someone's been here," he stated, his voice a dangerous undertone. "Look." He pointed out tiny, almost invisible holes bored into the trough's bottom. "They've drained the water." Mae gasped, a hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. "But why? Who would do such a thing?" Jessie rose, scanning the surrounding expanse. "Someone who wants to hurt you, Mae. Someone aiming to make things harder." A wave of despair threatened to engulf Mae. The drought was already crippling them. This was catastrophic. Without water, the cattle were doomed. Without the cattle, the ranch would fail. She felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down, the future of her family a crushing burden. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't keep fighting." Jessie stepped closer, his gaze intense. He placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Yes, you can, Mae. You're stronger than you believe. And you're not alone." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here, and I won't let anyone harm you or yours." As if summoned, a lone figure topped the distant rise, astride a dust-caked black stallion. Clad in a dark suit, he was a stark contrast to the rugged landscape. Even at that distance, he exuded a predatory confidence. Mae recognized him instantly. Jedediah Stone. He spurred his mount forward, closing the gap with cock. Unnerving speed. He halted a few feet away, his eyes cold and assessing, fixed on me. "Miss Whitaker," he greeted, his voice smooth as velvet. "Have you had time to reconsider my proposition?" Mae stood firm, her chin lifting. "I told you, Mr. Stone, this ranch is not for sale." Stone offered a smile, devoid of warmth. "A pity," he replied. "Such a waste of prime land. Especially considering your recent misfortunes." He gestured towards the emptying trough. "Accidents do happen, of course, particularly during times like these." Jesse stepped forward, placing himself between Mae and Stone, a protective barrier. "You stay away from her, Stone," he growled, his voice sharp. Stone's gaze shifted, his eyes narrowing as he sized Jesse up. "And who might you be?" he inquired, dripping with sarcasm. "Just another hired hand?" Jesse remained silent, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Stone shift uneasily. Stone chuckled, a hollow, mirthless sound. "Very well," he said. "I see my presence is no longer required. But don't imagine this is over, Miss Whitaker. Sooner or later, you'll realize you have no choice." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving Mae and Jesse standing in the settling dust, the weight of his threat palpable. As Stone vanished over the horizon, Lily dashed to Mae, wrapping her small arms around her waist. "Don't worry, Mae," she declared, her voice resolute. "Jesse will keep us safe." Mae looked down at Lily, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and dread. Jesse would protect them, yes, but who would protect them from Jesse himself? And what would happen when the truth of his former life finally caught up? The well wasn't merely in disrepair. It was a desecration. Mangled iron, splintered wood, the reek of stagnant water and bitter soil permeated the air. Jesse hunkered down, a weathered hand gliding over a warped pipe, his gaze sharp and assessing. He'd witnessed far graver scenes, and been the architect of some. Now, he was tasked with its revival. "Nitroglycerin," he muttered, more to himself than aloud. Mae had retreated indoors, a tempest brewing behind her gaze, as formidable as the approaching storm. Dynamite, Jedediah Stone's favored tool, was, ironically, also a language Jesse understood intimately. He knew its volatile nature, its vulnerabilities, its raw power. He knew how to coax it, to charm it into a serenade of annihilation, or, as in this case, a hymn of restoration. Under a lightless sky that night, he toiled. No lanterns betrayed his presence. He sought no audience with Sheriff Brody, or anyone else for that matter. The moon offered just enough silver wash to navigate by, casting the scene in monochrome. He moved with a practiced ease, a phantom amidst the swaying grasses. His tools were few: a length of rope, a corroded pry bar, a borrowed pickaxe from the barn, and knowledge gleaned from a life lived outside the law. First came the clearing. Distorted metal screeched in protest as he wrestled it loose, the sound magnified in the stillness. He worked with methodical precision, muscles aching, breath ragged. Each strike of the pickaxe, each forceful lever of the crowbar, served as a small recompense, a minuscule payment for past transgressions. Locating the epicenter of the damage, the point where the explosive had been set, was akin to deciphering an inscription etched into the earth. He traced the fissures with his fingertips, sensing the subtle tremors still resonating within the ground. Stone's handiwork lacked subtlety. He'd aimed to make a statement, to leave Mae crippled. Jesse envisioned a different outcome. The subsequent hours were dedicated to salvaging. He knew Mia lacked the funds for new materials or professional assistance. Improvisation was key. He recalled an abandoned mine shaft a few miles north, choked with debris and the ghosts of unfulfilled ambitions. It was a long shot, but the only one he had. Securing a horse knot his own he rode into the enveloping darkness, the wind lashing at his face like a disapproving whisper. The mine loomed, a silent mausoleum. The air hung heavy with the stench of damp earth and decay. There, he discovered his quarry. Lengths of solid iron conduit, discarded by miners long since departed. Rusted and scarred, they were nevertheless viable. He loaded the haul onto the horse, the animal groaning under the added weight, and commenced the arduous return journey to the ranch. The next day unfolded into a series of calculated gambles and muffled detonations. He employed small charges, meticulously placed, to reform the ruined well lining, fusing the reclaimed pipes into place with a makeshift forge fashioned from discarded barn implements. It demanded a delicate touch, a careful equilibrium between destruction and repair. He redirected the destructive capabilities he knew intimately toward a constructive end, deriving an unexpected sense of fulfillment from the metamorphosis. He labored alone, a solitary figure silhouetted against the vast expanse. He preferred Mia not witness this side of him, not grasp the breadth of his proficiency. He wanted her to see only the hired hand, the man who mended fences and cared for the livestock, not the renegade fluent in the vernacular of explosives. By the third day, his task was complete. The well stood restored, the marks of stone sabotage concealed beneath a mosaic of iron and resourcefulness. The water remained cloudy for now, but it flowed. It gurgled and chuckled, a life-giving force that had been silenced, now resurrected. Mae found him seated beside the well, his face smudged with dirt and grime, his eyes shielded against the glare. She had been avoiding him since Stone's unwelcome visit, the sheriff's ominous words casting a shadow between them. But the sight of the rejuvenated well drew her in, like a moth to a beckoning flame. "Jessie," she spoke softly, her voice barely audible above the burbling sound of the water. He opened his eyes, startled by her presence. "Me." She knelt down, dipping her hand into the cool liquid. "It's fixed." "Yeah," he replied, his expression guarded. "Took some doing." I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He averted his gaze, discomforted by her gratitude. "Don't mention it. It was part of the job." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "No, Jessie, it was more than that. You didn't have to do this." He rose to his feet, brushing off his pants. "Someone had to. You got chores, me. I'll see to the horses." He turned, leaving her kneeling beside the well, the sunlight dancing off the surface, concealing the secrets he'd buried deep below. That evening, once the children were asleep, Mae sat on the porch, listening to the chorus of crickets and the whispering trees. She couldn't dismiss the feeling that Jessie concealed something. His evasive answers, his unexplained absences all pointed to a truth she couldn't quite grasp. She knew he was an outlaw. Brody had made that unequivocally clear. But what sort of outlaw? A heartless killer? Or something else entirely? She gazed out at the inky landscape, her heart laden with doubt. She required Jessie, needed his resilience, his dedication, his quiet competence. Yet could she place her, trust in him? Could she confide in a man haunted by a past as dark as the night that enveloped her? The answer, she realized, remained elusive. But one thing was certain. The well flowed again, and for now, that sliver of hope was enough. Unbeknownst to her, Jessie watched from the barn's shadow, the weight of his deception bearing down on him. The well was indeed functional. But what price had been paid? He'd relied upon his old skills, his outlaw's ingenuity, to come to her aid. But in doing so, he had only intensified the falsehood, further ensnaring her in a web of lies. He had to confess. He had to reveal the truth about his former life, the man he once was. But how could he risk losing her, forfeiting the only redemption he had ever known? The burden of his clandestine history pressed upon him, heavier than any offense he had committed. He closed his eyes, the image of Mia's face imprinted on his mind. He would shield her, irrespective of the cost, even if it demanded relinquishing his own happiness, even if it meant exposing the darkness that festered within. He owed her nothing less. The unmasking dust motes danced in the slanting rays that knifed through the grimy bunkhouse window, striping the floor. Mae knew she was trespassing. Jesse had been explicit. "My space, Mae," he'd grumbled, a rare sharpness in the voice she usually coaxed into softness. But necessity drove her a specific wrench. Absent from the main house's tool collection that she recalled seeing gleaming on his workbench, her search through the chaotic jumble of tools, horse gear, and dog-eared paperbacks led her to it, hidden beneath a canvas sheet caw. A small, wooden box, its surface an intricate tapestry of carved wolves baying at a celestial orb. It possessed a substantial weight, a gravity that piqued her interest. A familiar devil of curiosity began to whisper. The lock proved a mere suggestion of security. A gentle coaxing, and it yielded. Inside, nestled on threadbare velvet, were artifacts utterly foreign to the Jessie she knew. A tarnished silver timepiece, an aged journal swathed in leather, and a collection of photographs. Mae lifted one, a younger, harder Jessie, his features etched with a ruthless determination, brandished a rifle. Surrounding him, a cadre of equally severe men posed before a bank. A gasp caught in her throat. She shuffled through the stack. Images of train heists, stagecoach ambushes, each a stark, brutal snapshot of violence. Then, the damning blow. A fragile, yellowed newspaper clipping screamed, "Jesse Kane gang terrorizes the Southwest." Below, a likeness of the man she knew, but with a different appellation blazoned. Jesse Kane. Wanted, dead or alive. The wrench slipped from her grasp, landing with a dull thud. Color fled her face, leaving her pallid. The bunkhouse seemed to constrict, the air growing heavy, stale. Small oddities, the quirks she'd dismissed, the haunted depths of his eyes, the feline grace of his movements, all coalesced into a terrifying picture. She bolted from the bunkhouse, the newspaper clutched in her hand like a venomous viper. The world tilted. She needed to confront him. He was by the well. His brow creased in concentration as he examined the pump mechanism. He glanced up, a shadow of worry darkening his features as he registered her presence. "Me? What's wrong?" Speech deserted her. She simply thrust the damning article forward, her hand trembling with such intensity the paper vibrated. He snatched it, his complexion paling as he recognized the headline. His gaze darted to hers, a silent entreaty for understanding flickering within. But the moment had passed. The truth, raw and unvarnished, stood exposed between them. "Jesse," she managed, her voice a fragile thread. "Is this you?" Silence answered, an admission more damning than any words. "Tell me," she urged, her tone escalating. "Tell me it's not true." He finally spoke, his voice a low, rasping rumble. "Me, I can explain." "Explain?" she countered, a note of hysteria threading her voice. "Explain how you're a criminal, a fugitive? Explain the deceit, the lies spun to me, to my kin?" He moved toward her, extending a hand in supplication. She recoiled. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and betrayal. "How could you? After everything. After I confided in you." "Me, please," he implored, his voice ragged with distress. "I'm not that man any longer. I swear to you, I've changed." "Changed?" she scoffed, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. "You imagine altering your name erases your true self? You believe burying your history makes it vanish? You're still Jesse Kane. Still a deceiver. Still a thief." "I was young, me," he argued, his voice tight with emotion. "I had catastrophic blunders, but I've been striving to atone. Working here, aiding you, it presented a path toward a different existence." "A path?" she cried. "My family is not a refuge for your redemption project. This wretch, my siblings, they aren't pawns in a game you play to cleanse your conscience." "That's unfair," he retorted, his jaw clenched. "I hold affection for you, me." "I care for Sarah and Billy. This place, it resonates with me." "Affection?" she echoed, her voice saturated with scorn. "Your affection runs so deep you fabricated a persona before me each and every day? You permitted me to embrace a figment of your imagination? You permitted me. The words caught, choked by the immensity of the deception. "Permitted you what, Mae?" He pressed, his tone dangerously subdued. "To yield my heart to a monster?" The ensuing silence hung in the air like a shroud, punctuated only by the desolate groan of the windmill. She offered no denial. The truth loomed, oppressive and suffocating. "Leave my property," she declared, her voice devoid of warmth. "Leave and never return." "Me, don't," he pleaded, advancing a step. "Please, let me elucidate." "There is no elucidation sufficient," she responded, her eyes reflecting a pain that mirrored his own. "You are Jesse Kane, and I am incapable of believing you. Incapable of believing any utterance you have made. Depart." He remained motionless for a beat, his face a canvas of torment, his shoulders slumping in resignation. Then, with agonizing slowness, he turned and walked away, his silhouette stark against the fading sunlight. Mae watched his departure, her heart fracturing with each retreating step. She yearned to summon him back, to implore him to remain, to embrace the illusion, yet she could not. The faith was irrevocably broken, the bond severed. He was Jesse Kane, the outlaw, and she was Mae Whitaker, the woman who had, with utter folly and desperation, surrendered to love. As he vanished over the horizon, she crumpled to her knees, the newspaper clipping drifting to the earth like a lifeless leaf. The ranch, her sanctuary, felt colder, more desolate than ever imaginable. Confessions of a sinner, the kitchen's quiet pressed down. Like a shroud. Outside, rain clawed at the panes, an echo of Me's inner turmoil. Jesse stood opposite her, his face a canvas of remorse etched under the lamp's weak glow. On the table, the open box displayed its damning contents. Pictures, a faded, wanted circular, a sheriff's star dulled with age. "So, it's all true," Mae finally choked out, her voice fracturing. "Jesse Kanan." He winced as if struck. "Me, Juicy." "Don't," she retorted, the sting of betrayal giving her words an edge. "How could you? Everything I thought was real." She flung her hand toward the box. "This is the man you are?" He offered no denial, no excuse. "The man I was," he amended, voice gravelly. He started towards her, halting when she flinched back. Let me try and explain. She folded her arms tight, her gaze unwavering. Flinty. I'm listening now, tell me. Jessie inhaled raggedly, the air thick with damp wool and the tang of wood smoke. It began a lifetime ago, it seems. Barely past boyhood I was. My family, we were ruined. The bank stole our livelihood, left us with nothing. My father, he couldn't bear the weight. He ended his life. A flicker of something akin to pity softened Mae's face. She understood crushing loss. I was consumed with rage, Jessie continued, the memory leaving a foul taste. Blinded by it, I held everyone responsible. The bank, wealthy landowners, anyone who had more than we did. I mixed with the wrong kind. Men who shared the same anger. Men hungry for power. He paused, looking at the floor. At first, petty thefts. Stagecoaches. Local shops. It gradually spun out of control. Daring crimes. Increasingly reckless. The money, it was a bottomless pit. Never quenched the thirst. Violence grew easier. Mae grimaced, the image forming in her mind. The badge, then? Her voice was barely audible. I took it from a sheriff who tried to intervene, Jessie confessed, his voice thick with self-loathing. He didn't survive. The words hung, suffocating. Mae squeezed her eyes shut, her stomach twisting. You murdered him? I didn't fire the shot, Jessie said urgently, desperately. But I was there, involved, as culpable as if I had. He looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. That's the truth, Mae, in all its repulsiveness. The rain hammered harder, sounding like a merciless verdict. Mae opened her eyes, scrutinizing his. Why? Why tell me this now? Why not just vanish, like you've done before? Because I can't anymore, Jessie replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Because of you. Because of this Reg. Because I crave the chance to redeem myself, to be deserving of your love. He edged closer, his hand outstretched, then faltering. When I arrived, I was simply seeking refuge, an escape from my past. Then I encountered you. I witnessed your resolve, your devotion to your family, to this land. It brought back the memory of what I lost, what I willingly abandoned. And you thought you could merely play a role? Mae questioned, bitterness coloring her tone. Deceive everyone and be someone else? No, Jessie denied, shaking his head slowly. I understood that I couldn't conceal it forever, but I nurtured the hope that, perhaps, I could become the man you perceived me to be, the man I aspired to. He sank to his knees, head bowed in supplication. I acknowledge that I'm unworthy of your forgiveness, me, that I've caused you pain, but I swear to you, everything I've done since I set foot on this land has been authentic. My feelings for you, they're honest. I'm not that man any longer. I reject him completely. Mae gazed down at him, her heart aching with conflicting emotions. She recognized the genuine sorrow in his eyes, the desperation etched in his posture. But she couldn't ignore the lingering shadows of his former life, the darkness that clung to him. How can I place my faith in you? She asked, her voice shaking. How can trust exist after this? What I believed about you all fiction? I recognize the difficulty, Jessie said, his voice barely audible. I'm not suggesting you erase what I've done, only that you consider I can improve, that I will be better. For your sake. He looked up, his eyes naked with a vulnerability that resonated deep within her. Give me a chance, Mae. Just a single chance to demonstrate that I'm not the monster I once was. Silence descended once more, broken solely by the incessant drumming of the rain. Mae studied him, her mind spinning, her heart warring with itself. She yearned to believe him, to embrace the hope that the man she loved was capable of transformation. But the enormity of his history, the violence and deceit, loomed like an insurmountable wall. She recalled her parents and their sacrifices for the ranch. She thought of her innocent siblings. Could she gamble their safety, their future, on a man shadowed by such a grim past? Finally she spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. "Stand up, Jessie." He slowly rose, his eyes locked on her face, searching for even the faintest glimmer of hope. "I need time," Mae said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Time to ponder, time to decide if I can find forgiveness." She turned away from him. "Leave. Just go and let me think." Jesse hesitated, his heart plummeting. He longed to embrace her, to reassure her that everything would be all right. But he knew he couldn't. He had shattered her trust, and it was now his burden to rebuild it. He turned and headed for the door, his footsteps heavy. Reaching the doorway, he paused, his hand on the knob. "Me," he said, his voice barely audible. "I love you." He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped out into the tempest, leaving Mae alone in the kitchen, haunted by the specters of his past and the ruins of their shattered dreams. The rain enveloped him, a chilling cleansing, a promise of a redemption he wasn't sure he deserved. He understood the road would be long and arduous, but he was determined to follow it, even if it meant doing so alone. He had to prove to Mae and to himself that he was worthy of a fresh start, that he could truly embody the man she believed he had the potential to be. The hunter arrives the sun, a merciless hammer, pounded redemption. The dirt of Main Street, usually loose and shifting, had been annealed into a hard pan. Waves of heat radiated from the corrugated iron roofs, bending the familiar lines of the Golden Barrel Saloon and Mathis Mercantile. High above, a hawk drifted in wide circles, its shadow a fleeting balm on the scorched ground. That solitary cry gave way to the steady drumming of approaching hooves. The rider didn't rush his measured advance telegraphed resolve and unshakable purpose. Silas Blackwood sat astride a mare the color of midnight. His face, a roadmap of hardship, remained shielded by the brim of his hat, obscuring his gaze. A long, dark coat failed to completely conceal the well-worn leather of his gun rig. He was a dark stain on the sun-drenched panorama, a harbinger of trouble rolling into town. The townsfolk, typically abuzz with activity, stilled. Voices faded. Children abandoned their play, their eyes reflecting a gut-level anxiety. They sensed something formidable in this newcomer, something inherently dangerous. Blackwood halted his horse before the saloon, the silence amplifying the clink of its tack. He dismounted with an economy of motion that defied his years, securing the animal to the rail. He then turned, his eyes sweeping the watching faces. Inside, the piano player stumbled, his ragtime melody collapsing into a jarring discord. The card game ground to a halt, the players caught in tableau. Even the air seemed to grow heavy with anticipation. Blackwood pushed through the batwings, the saloon's gloom offering scant respite from the oppressive heat. He moved to the bar, his boots muffled by the sawdust covering the floorboards. "Whiskey," he stated, his voice a gravelly rumble that resonated through the room. The bartender, a stocky figure distinguished by a walrus mustache, hastened to comply, his hands betraying a slight tremor as he poured the amber liquid. Blackwood accepted the glass, swirling its contents before taking a measured sip. He set down the glass, his gaze locking on the bartenders. I'm looking for someone. Name's Jesse Kane. The bartender's eyes flickered nervously. Haven't heard that name, he muttered, polishing the counter with unnecessary vigor. A sardonic smile touched Blackwood's lips. This town ain't that big. News travels like wildfire. Someone here knows him. Someone's seen him. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the buzzing of flies. Finally, a voice, coarse and uncertain, emerged from the back. There's a fellow works over at Whitaker's Spread. Goes by Jesse something or other. Might be your man. Blackwood pivoted, his eyes narrowed to slits. Whitaker's ranch? And this something or other? Can't rightly recall. The man mumbled, retreating further into the shadows. Just overheard it mentioned. He keeps to himself. Blackwood gave a slow nod, a predatory light in his eyes. He drained his whiskey, the empty glass meeting the bar with a soft click. I appreciate the information. He turned and exited the saloon, leaving behind a palpable sense of disquiet. From his office window across the street, Sheriff Brody watched Blackwood. He'd seen his kind before, men who dispensed their own brand of justice, a justice often more brutal than any court would allow. He'd also been keeping tabs on Jesse Kane since his arrival in Redemption months ago. He'd observed the quiet strength, the willingness to work hard, the surprising tenderness in his eyes when he looked at Mae Whitaker. And he'd noted the haunted quality that clung to him, the shadow of a past he couldn't shake. Brody stepped out of his office as Blackwood approached. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume?" he inquired, his tone level. Blackwood paused, his gaze meeting Brody's head-on. "Sheriff, I'm here to take Jesse Kane into custody. I have a warrant." He produced a folded document, extending it to Brody. Brody accepted the warrant, his eyes quickly scanning the charges. Assault, robbery, murder, quite the rap sheet. Mr. Kane hasn't caused any problems here. He's been working on the Whitaker Ranch, a model of discretion. His history doesn't vanish just because he's found a hole to crawl into, Blackwood said, his voice flat. Justice demands accountability. Justice is a multifaceted concept, Mr. Blackwood, Brody countered, returning the warrant. Sometimes it involves more than simple punishment. Sometimes it's about granting a man a chance at atonement. Blackwood scoffed, a harsh sound. Atonement? A scorpion doesn't shed its stinger, Sheriff. A man like Kane will always pose a threat. It's my obligation to ensure he answers for his actions. And what if those actions stemmed from desperate circumstances? What if he's genuinely striving for a different path? Brody challenged, his voice taking on an edge. Circumstances don't forgive the taking of a life, Blackwood retorted, his gaze unwavering. And as for transformation, men like Kane only change when they've exhausted all other options. He paused, a thread of steel weaving into his voice. I intend to see that he runs out of options, Sheriff. I'd prefer it if you didn't interfere. Brody stood firm, his jaw tightening. I represent the law in this town, Mr. Blackwood. I'll see that justice is done, but I won't allow you to play judge, jury, and executioner. A cold, unsettling smile played on Blackwood's lips. Then we understand each other, Sheriff. He turned and headed towards the livery, the black mare waiting stoically under the sun's glare. He mounted with practiced ease and rode out of town, in the direction of the Whitaker Ranch. Brody watched him depart, a feeling of foreboding settling in his stomach. He knew Blackwood wouldn't be dissuaded. He was a predator, single-minded and relentless. And Jesse Kane, whether he deserved it or not, was now his quarry. Brody glanced at the horizon, the setting sun painting long, ominous shadows across the landscape. He understood that the tranquility of redemption had been irrevocably breached, and that the days ahead would be fraught with peril. He had a dark premonition things were about to spiral downwards. A choice of sacrifice's lamplight painted elongated wavering shapes across the rough boards of his cramped room. Jesse redipped the pen, the ink feathering slightly on the absorbent paper. 3 crumpled failures already lay discarded, each a flimsy concoction of lies and evasions. This one had to work. It had to suffice. Me, he wrote, the name a silent supplication. By the time you find this, I'll be gone. I know this will wound you, a pain I never wished to inflict, but my staying would endanger you, Lily, and Billy even more. He paused, the enormity of his choice a physical weight. How could he articulate the impossible? How impress upon her that his devotion was the very impetus for his departure? Blackwood's here. He knows who I am. He'll pursue me relentlessly. Sheriff Brody might hold him at bay for a time, but it won't last, and when cornered, Blackwood won't hesitate to use anyone as leverage. He pictured Mae, her indomitable spirit, her fierce protectiveness toward her own. He saw Lily's sparkling gaze, Billy's boundless zest. He couldn't allow his past to obliterate their future. I sought sanctuary here, a chance to reinvent myself, and briefly, I believed I had. You revealed the essence of goodness, of worthiness. You fostered the notion that I could become the man you perceived. A tear fell, a dark bloom on the parchment. He scrubbed it away, his throat constricted. But the truth remains. Some specters cannot be outrun. My history is a relentless pursuer, and I can't permit its shadow to engulf you. He faltered, grasping for the words to convey the immensity of his love. I love you, me, more profoundly than I ever imagined possible. That's the reason for this desperate act. I can't gamble with your life, or the lives of your kin. You deserve a haven, a genuine future, untouched by the kind of darkness that clings to me. He concluded the letter, signing it simply, Jesse, folded it deliberately, and placed it on the nightstand. He discovered Lily on the porch swing, softly murmuring to herself as she wove a wreath of wildflowers. The moon bathed her face in ethereal silver, transforming her into a delicate sprite. Lily, he murmured, kneeling beside her. She glanced up, her eyes wide and guileless. Jesse, are you going away? He manufactured a smile. Just for a bit. I need to take care of something. Will you come back? Anxiety tinged her voice. He hesitated. I'll always be watching over you, Lily. You and Billy, you both hold a special place in my heart. He reached out, his knuckles grazing her cheek. You be good for Mae, all right? And keep tending to the animals. Lily nodded, her lower lip trembling almost imperceptibly. She seemed to sense this wasn't a simple errand. He found Billy in the barn, wrestling with a broken saddle strap. The boy looked up, his brow furrowed in concentration. Hey, Jesse, he greeted. Can you show me how to fix this? Jesse accepted the strap, his fingers immediately finding the worn places. Sure, Billy. The trick is in how you thread the needle. He worked beside the boy, guiding him through the process. As he did, he contemplated the milestones he would miss teaching him to ride properly, to hunt skillfully, to navigate the complexities of manhood. You're a good kid, Billy, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. You're strong and brave, and you always look out for your family. Don't ever lose that. Billy looked up, puzzled. "Where are you going, Jessie?" "I have to leave for a while," Jessie replied, "but I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll care for me. She needs you, Billy, and you need her." Billy nodded solemnly. "I promise," he vowed. Jessie clapped him on the shoulder. "That's my boy." He quit the barn and headed toward the stables, the weight of his resolve pressing down on him. He saddled his horse, his movements automatic. He cast a glance back at the farmhouse, the windows glowing with a soft, inviting luminescence. He could almost conjure Mae's expression, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. He squeezed his eyes shut, striving to banish her image, to erase the sensation of her touch, her smile, her unwavering faith in him. Futile. She was interwoven with his very being, a part of him he could never truly shed. With a leaden heart, he mounted his horse and pointed him toward the vast emptiness. He nudged the animal forward, the steady cadence of hooves the only sound against the stillness. As he rode away, he was acutely aware he was abandoning the single thing he had ever earnestly desired. But he recognized it as the only means of shielding her. He rode until the ranch was reduced to a mere smudge on the horizon. Then he dissolved into the inky blackness, a specter fleeing into the night, leaving behind a brutal calculus of sacrifice. He'd chosen to forfeit his own contentment for the security and welfare of the woman he adored and her family. The starkness of the open range mirrored the hollowness within him. He knew, with a dread that settled deep into his bones, that he would never know true liberation. The outlaw Jesse Kane might be buried, but the repercussions of his existence would forever haunt the periphery of his new, borrowed reality. Defiance and devotion the paper, brittle and frigid against Mae's quivering fingers, held Jesse's desperate message. Ink blurred, a casualty of the dawn creeping through the kitchen window, and his frantic script. Each phrase landed like a physical blow, demolishing the nascent tranquility she'd cultivated. "Blackwood after me, danger to you both." The words swam before her eyes, obscured by the gathering tide of tears. It wasn't self-preservation that stole her breath, but the agonizing depth of Jesse's sacrifice. He was fleeing, once more relinquishing the settled life he craved, all for her family's safety. She reread his final pledge, her fingertips tracing the inked dance of his hand. "Never forget you, Mae, never." The raw sincerity of those words struck her with an almost unbearable force. Not gratitude, not simple relief, but a fierce, terrifying affection, one that had stubbornly taken root in the barren soil of her existence, a love she had desperately tried to deny, to bury beneath practicality. Fear. The staccato drumming of hooves against the parched earth sliced through her despair. Blackwood. He was here. Mae crushed the missive in her fist, resolution steeling her jaw. She wouldn't yield. Jesse's sacrifice demanded more. Stepping onto the porch, she was met by the sunrise, which cast elongated, phantom shadows that writhed around her. Astride a towering obsidian stallion sat Blackwood, his face an impassive carving beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His gaze, sharp and predatory, scanned the homestead, briefly noting the unoccupied corral before settling on her. "Mae Whitaker," he rumbled, his voice a low, resonant threat carried on the morning air. "I hear you're providing sanctuary to a wanted man." Mae stood firm, chin raised in defiance. "Jesse Kane is no fugitive. He's a good man, a hard worker." A dry, grating chuckle escaped Blackwood. "Jesse Kane? A recent invention, I presume. He's known by other names, Miss Whitaker. Names that carry a certain notoriety. Names like the serpent." The moniker landed with the force of a physical blow. "He's changed," she insisted, her voice betraying only a faint tremor. "That's not who he is now. People don't reinvent themselves, Miss Whitaker. Not truly. A leopard keeps its spots, and a snake simply trades one skin for another." He dismounted, his movements deliberate and menacing. "I possess a warrant for his arrest. Resistance will be met with the full weight of the law." Mae moved forward, positioning herself between Blackwood and the direction of Jesse's escape. "He's gone. He left to keep us safe, my children and me." "Gone, has he?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed to slits. "He wouldn't run for nothing. He's still on this land, concealed, and I intend to unearth him." He began to move past her, but Mae stood her ground, her hand instinctively finding the rifle leaning against the porch post. "You won't touch him," she declared, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "He's done nothing wrong. He's toiled, he's been honorable, and he's been everything this family has needed." Blackwood halted, his gaze intense and probing. "You're shielding him. Why? What is he to you?" Mae hesitated for a heartbeat, then met his gaze head-on. "He's the man I love." The words, voiced for the first time, hung in the air, heavy with truth and vulnerability. Blackwood's expression remained unchanged, an unreadable mask. "Love is a vulnerability, Miss Whitaker, a weakness ripe for exploitation." He reached into his coat and produced a dog-eared poster, tossing it at her feet. It depicted a faded image of a younger Jesse, his features hardened, his eyes lacking the warmth she knew. "This the man you love? A murderer? A thief? A man with a bounty on his head?" Mae didn't flinch, her gaze unwavering. "That was the man he was. Not the man he is today. I know his soul. I know what he is capable of, and I know he's innocent of this." Blackwood dismissed her plea. "He's mine now, and I always bring in my quarry, by hook or by crook." He turned back toward his stallion, ready to resume the chase. "Wait!" Mae's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, just let him go. He'll vanish. He'll be no one's trouble again. I swear it." Blackwood paused, a flicker of something indecipherable crossing his face. "You'd stake your reputation on this man? Risk everything for a man like him?" "I would," Mae declared without hesitation. "He's worth it." Blackwood scrutinized her for a long moment, then spat a wad of tobacco juice into the dust. "Foolish woman, you'll live to regret this." He swung into the saddle and spurred his mount forward, tracking the faint disturbance Jessie had left in the dew-laden grass. Mae watched him go, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew Blackwood was implacable, driven by vengeance, or perhaps merely the thrill of the pursuit. She had to act. She couldn't simply stand idle while Jessie was dragged back into that shadowed existence. Turning swiftly back to the house, she moved with urgent purpose. Villy and Billy were still asleep, their faces serene in the gentle morning light. She hastily scribbled a note, explaining her temporary absence and entrusting them to Martha's care at the neighboring ranch. Then she gathered provisions, a bedroll, dried jerky, a canteen filled with water, and her father's aged Colt revolver. She saddled her own horse, a dependable mare named Bess, her movements efficient and determined. As she mounted, she glanced back at the ranch, a surge of emotion washing over her. Fear, undoubtedly, but also an unshakable resolve. She was abandoning the familiar, everything she'd fought so hard to secure, for the sake of a man she loved. Picking up Jessie's trail, distinct from the bounty hunter's heavier track, she set off. The landscape stretched before her, vast and unforgiving, but Mia refused to waver. She rode with unwavering focus, propelled by a love that defied logic, a devotion that burned brighter than the desert sun. She would find Jesse, and she would protect him, even at the cost of everything else. Redemption's embrace the air vibrated, heavy with the aromatic bite of sage and the sharp coppery tang of dread. Reaching the crest of the low rise, Mae's breath caught. Below, Jesse stood starkly outlined against the parched creek bed under the blaze of the afternoon sun. Facing him, Silas Blackwood, a dark figure etched against the pale earth, his hand perilously close to his revolver. "Jesse!" she cried, her voice fraying at the edges. Both men pivoted toward her. Blackwood's gaze sharpened, a brief flash of irritation clouding his weathered features. Jesse's reaction was a tangled knot of relief, warring with apprehension. He understood her presence, and the understanding twisted within him. "Me, get out," he rumbled, his voice a low rasp, roughened by years of hardship and unspoken remorse. "Not without you," she countered, the crunch of loose stones under her boots echoing as she hurried down the slope. She halted a few feet from Jesse, positioning herself squarely between him and Blackwood. "This stops now." A mirthless sound, dry as desert bones, escaped Blackwood's lips. "This ends with Kane back where he belongs, behind bars or pushing up daisies." He punctuated the statement with a brown stream of tobacco juice aimed at the dust. "Step aside, ma'am. This ain't your affair." "It is now," Mae declared, her chin lifted. "Jesse Kane is in my employ. He's under my roof." A calculating look flickered in Blackwood's eyes as he scanned her, a cold assessment that prickled her skin. "Under your roof, huh?" "He's hoodwinked you, lady. That man's a killer." Jesse visibly recoiled, the accusation hanging between them like a judge's sentence. He knew Blackwood's intent, to erode her resolve, to taint her perception. "I know his history," Mae replied, her voice ringing with conviction. "And I see the man he strives to become." Blackwood's hand closed on the revolver's grip. "Then you're a simpleton." The weapon cleared leather with practiced ease, the steel reflecting the sun in a blinding flash. Time seemed to stretch. Mae watched the hammer draw back, a cold premonition tightening in her gut. But before Blackwood could pull the trigger, Jesse exploded into action. A whirlwind of motion, he moved faster than thought aloud, disarming Blackwood with sudden, brutal economy. The bounty hunter's gun thudded to the ground. Blackwood gaped at his empty hand, disbelief contorting his features. "You could have killed me," he spat, his voice thick with venom. Towering over him, Jesse's hands were clenched. The ghost of his former self, the one who met violence with violence, screamed for release, but he suppressed it, clinging to the image of Mae's trust, her unyielding faith, as an anchor. He drew a steadying breath, the scent of dust and the promise of a new life filling his lungs. "I'm finished with that," he stated, his voice unwavering. "I'm not turning back." He retreated a step, distancing himself from Blackwood, from the shadows that had clung to him for so long. His gaze sought Mae's, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and dawning hope. In her unwavering gaze, he found a strength he never suspected he possessed. Blackwood lunged for his weapon, but Jesse's kick sent it spinning across the dry bed of the creek. "Get out," Jesse commanded, a hard edge to his tone. "And stay gone." Blackwood glared, his face a mask of fury. But the fight had left him. He had underestimated Jesse Kane and the woman who stood unwavering at his side. Spitting on the parched earth, he turned and stalked toward his horse. He swung into the saddle, wheeled the animal around, and vanished in a cloud of dust. The ensuing quiet was profound. Mae's gaze remained locked on Jesse, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had witnessed his potential for darkness, and she had seen him choose light. As the dust began to settle, shapes emerged from the periphery. Drawn by the confrontation, the residents of Redemption had gathered on the ridge, silently observing. Sheriff Brody stepped forward, his face a mixture of relief and astonishment. Martha Jenkins, eyes wide with burgeoning gossip, clutched her shawl tighter. Even Old Man Hemlock, a fixture on his porch, stood leaning on his cane, his gaze fixed intently on Jesse. They had come, expecting to see the downfall of a monster, a ruthless killer brought to justice. Instead, they had witnessed a transformation. They had seen a man choose a different path. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Whispers started softly, tentatively, then swelled with growing confidence. They spoke of Jesse's bravery, his self-control, his resolve to leave his past behind. Sheriff Brody approached, extending a hand. "Kane," he acknowledged, his voice gruff with sincerity. "Looks like you've earned a clean slate." Jesse hesitated, then clasped the sheriff's hand. He met the gazes of the townspeople, faces once etched with suspicion and fear. He saw a shift. Acceptance was growing. Turning to Mae, his heart surged with emotion. She offered a smile, bright and forgiving, erasing years of pain and regret. Reaching out, he laced his fingers through hers. "Me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm in love with you." Tears welled in her eyes. She had waited for so long to hear those words, to believe she could be loved by a man marked like Jesse Kane. "I love you too, Jesse," she breathed, her voice trembling. "More than life itself." He pulled her close, enveloping her in his arms. They stood embraced, silhouetted against the fading sun, two souls entwined by love and the promise of a fresh start. The onlookers of Redemption watched in quiet awe, their hearts deeply moved. They had come to judge, but they remained to witness a miracle unfold. They had seen a man reborn, a community find solace, and a love bloom from the ashes of yesterday. Martha Jenkins dabbed at her eyes with her shawl, a watery smile playing on her lips. Even Old Man Hemlock offered a faint, almost imperceptible, smile. It seemed Redemption had discovered its own path to renewal. Jesse met Mae's gaze, his eyes shining with hope. "We can make a life here," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "A real life, together." Mae nodded, her heart soaring with joy. "Yes," she breathed. "Together." As the last rays of sunlight bled from the horizon, Jesse and Mae walked hand in hand towards the ranch, their footsteps echoing softly in the evening air. The heavy burden of the past had been shed, replaced by the lightness of love and a shared future. The outlaw had become a ranch hand, stealing her heart not through force, but through kindness, grit, and an immeasurable love. Redemption had welcomed them, offering a second act, a chance to build a life under the vast western sky.